Well, here we are. The one element of the RCSB that is most criticized, dissected, put under a microscope, and feared. I'm talking about the element of accent. Now, is it really this big, intimidating monster? Or is it just a harmless little paper tiger? Well, if we distill it to its basic components, I think it's not as bad. So stick around and we'll talk all about the element of accent. Hello! Welcome back to Character Voice Building with me, Fernando Macias. I'm here to help you build and develop well-rounded character voices. Now, we are now in the category of localization. So what is localization? Localization is the interpretation of language from a social or geographical standpoint. Now, the first element in this category of localization is accent. So what is accent? Accent is a distinctive mode of pronunciation of language made up of a special set of phonological rules and intonation. Now, phonological rules, what is that? Let's go back a little bit and define phoneme. A phoneme is any of a small set of units considered to be the basic distinctive units of speech by which words and sentences are represented. So the basic building blocks of a particular language. This is basically how you pronounce vowels, consonants, and the combination of a certain, set of them. So if that is a phoneme, a phonological rule is basically how you pronounce certain vowels, consonants, or the combination thereof. And to give you an example, the French word roux is written R-O-U-X. So it's not roux or roux, it's roux. That is a phonological rule. Now, there are things that somewhat get interchanged when we talk about this subject, and that is accent versus dialect. So accent is only the pronunciation and musicality, while a dialect includes things like grammar, syntax, vocabulary, and other things of that nature. Now, for the RCSB, I chose to go with accent instead of dialect. Why? The reason is, I tend to think of the RCSB as just purely the sound. No writing whatsoever. No content of the character, just how a character is performed. So with that in mind, writing is really where you need to know the dialect of things as opposed to the accent. Now, so if you're writing something and you're trying to write somebody who's supposed to be British, you need to know certain words, certain expressions, certain, colloquialisms from that region that you don't necessarily know if you're just worrying about the sound. Now, as a little note, improv does count as writing. It's just on-the-spot writing. So it definitely doesn't hurt to think of things in a dialect, to know all those specific words and colloquialisms. But for the sake of just purely the RCSB, we'll focus on accent purely. So let's begin with the three types of accents. We have regional accents, we have foreign accents, and we have class accents. So let's start with regional accents. Here you have things, for example, northern versus southern accent by city, by state, or even by country. And this, of course, is of the same language that you speak. So in our case, it would be any English-speaking country or region. With regional accents, you tend to have a strong focus on phoneme interchange. So what exactly is that? It's basically when you have, the same phoneme, you just pronounce it a little bit differently. So let's take the phrase come over here. In American English, you have come over here. In Scottish English, and I apologize, I still need to work on mine a little bit, but you have come over here. There's some key differences there. For example, let's start with the word come. In American English, that O is very different than Scottish. So you have come. It's darker. I also feel there's a little bit more of an H sound in American English. Come, whereas come. Over, in American English, you have the O, over, and of course the R, over. In Scottish, you have O, and the tapped R. over, over. And as we just talked about, the R is tapped. Here, here. We have the same words, they're just pronounced a little different. That is phoneme interchange. So that was regional accents. Let's talk about foreign accents. Foreign accents is when you have somebody from a country or region that doesn't speak your language try to speak that language. So for example, it would be a French person trying to speak English. Now, foreign accents tend to have a strong focus on phoneme substitutions. What do I mean by that? Well, French, for example, doesn't have the TH phoneme. It just doesn't exist in that language. So it tends to be substituted with a Z. For example, the, this, that. And finally, we have class accent. This is, of course, like upper, middle, lower class. British English seems to have a little bit more of a pronounced distinction between those classes. Now, this tends to have much more of a strong focus on musicality distinction, pronunciation, and more dialect stuff like words and colloquialisms. Now, let's talk about the components of an accent. I divide it into two, just two, and it is pronunciation of different phonemes and the musicality. That's it. So we have pronunciation and musicality. Let's start with pronunciation. Because of how certain phonemes are pronounced, you use different muscles than what you're used to. It can feel very awkward at first. Your muscles are just not used to doing that. But just like going to the gym and exercising your whole body, that's what you need to do. Keep at it until it feels natural. An example of this is when I first started trying out archery. I bought myself this awesome recurve bow, beautiful, and I went to the range and I started pulling it, and it was really, really hard to pull it. I could barely pull it all the way back. That was the first day. After a few weeks of going back to the archery range, it wasn't an issue for me to pull it back anymore or even to hold it there. Why? One, because I'd never used those muscles in that way before, so they weren't used to it. And from doing the exercise of pulling it back so many times, my body developed those muscles and got used to that sensation. The same thing with an accent. Now, because of this pronunciation and the muscles you use, this creates a general mouth posture. So it creates a familiar shape and feeling that you use when talking. This gives you the sound and resonance that you need for that particular accent. Now, something I really enjoy in this regard is the Scottish L. In American English, you put your tongue right down the middle and you let the air flow through basically both sides. L. It's much more open. But in Scottish, it sounds like it's almost only to one side. So you kind of take one side out and let the other L, that kind of thing. This is, of course, a little exaggerated, but that's the general feeling. And I feel like there's air flowing through only one side, almost like speaking through the cheeks. That is part of the memory you have of that mouth posture. Little, brittle. Some people will refer to this as tonal placement and will say things like, focus on the top front teeth, or focus on the bottom of your chin, or you have a ball in the middle of your mouth. It's the exact same thing, just a different way of visualizing that general mouth posture. Now, quick note on resonance, which is very important in an accent, of course. This is really the byproduct of the use of those muscles. So some people may choose to focus on the resonance instead of the physical mechanics of it, like how it feels with the tongue and everything. Maybe they have a better way to aim for that resonance and their body just adjusts to that. And that's totally fine, absolutely. Or you could do it the other way around. You say, okay, if I move my tongue this way and I try to arch it this way and my, everything else, I can achieve that resonance. Both options are perfectly valid. So that was component number one of an accent, which was pronunciation. The other component is musicality. As we talked about before, musicality is the variance in pitch and rhythm throughout speech. Each accent has a distinct musicality, a distinct general musicality. I would suggest going back and watching the actual musicality element spotlight video because it's kind of difficult to explain, and we go much, much deeper into it there. An Australian accent is a great one to really analyze the musicality because it seems to go like that. Like it starts over here and then like there's something down the middle and then it goes up again. Like I still need to work on my Australian accent, but you get the idea. Now, something I really want to discuss here is criticism and confidence. You will find thousands of videos out there of people in a particular accent reviewing accents from other people. And every time you'll see them, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. It hurts my ears. Super exaggerated. And the funny thing is, I've actually seen videos where people hear people in that accent speaking, but they just don't know they're actually from the same place and they're still like, oh, it hurts my ears. It's terrible. It gets to be ridiculous. And here's something to my point. Jeff B. Davis from Whose Line Is It Anyway? And Harmontown, which I'm a huge fan of, has this story where he was there in a bar with some other friend. They were practicing, I think, some Australian accent or stuff like that for a part or just to develop it. So they were talking, and there were this group of girls that came by. So they went over and talked to the girls and they kept that accent. It's like, oh, where you go? Oh, I'm from, this part of Australia or whatever. So, and they bought it. It's like, okay, that's great. And it's like, okay, it doesn't matter. Nothing's going to happen. We're never going to see it again. Cut to a few days later, and Jeff sees one of those girls going to the bar again. So he decides to keep the accents. Like, hey, how you doing? They have a whole conversation. It was very, very fine. And she left, no problem. It's like, okay, how many times can this happen? So by the third time they see each other, he just decides to drop it. She goes up to the girl in American accent, says, hey, how's it going? How's everything? It's like, she's very surprised and asks, okay, what happened to your accent? So instead of saying, oh, I was faking, he just says, oh, I'm actually practicing my American accent for a part. And she goes, it could still use a lot of work. When he's actually an American person, an American actor. So you see, this is very, very skewed. When you tell somebody you're doing an accent, they will nitpick the hell out of it, even if it's not true. People need to remember that accents are generalizations. This is a general consensus of how most people talk. But each individual person is very different. No two are the same. Now, before I talk the one point I actually want to drive home, I want to have one more example, and this involves Emma Watson. She is, of course, undoubtedly British. But even she pronounces certain words different within the same conversation and even within that same sentence. So while you might be worried about, okay, how to pronounce this thing, oh, I mispronounced this whole other thing, this is a real person that is undoubtedly from Britain, but pronounces things very differently. I got this from a YouTube video from Tom from Eat, Sleep, Dream English. I will post the link in the video. Please watch it. I think it's very, very informative. It should really, hopefully, bring down that intimidation barrier and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I don't have to have 100% consistency in that accent. It would be great, absolutely, to be more convincing. But there's real people out there that do not follow those rules. If someone who didn't know her looked at the video and you told that person that she was trying on a British accent, they would probably cringe too and say discard it as fake because of these inconsistencies. But that's not the case. Emma Watson is a real person and that's just how she talks. So this brings me to the main thing I want you to take away from all of this, and that is confidence. Even if you mess up a few words or a few pronunciations or do things a little bit differently, people might still accept it as just the way you talk if you have done everything with true confidence. Now, something that goes with that confidence is always prioritizing content and character of who you are playing over the accent. Study the accent as best as you can to be as accurate and as authentic as you can, but never put it over content and character. Confidence is key. Now, I'm not going to do any examples on this video because it's gotten way too long, and there's plenty of examples out there in the real world. So instead, I'm going to give you 12 suggestions to keep in mind when trying on an accent, when developing it, or performing it in general. Number 1, try not to go for generalized accents. Be specific. So if you're looking up how to do an Irish accent, don't do Irish accent. Do Dublin accent. This helps with authenticity. Number 2, listen to many people with the accent you wish to emulate. That way you can get an average of all those voices and distill the true consistent elements of that accent. Number 3, think about which era of that accent you're trying to emulate. For example, American English has really varied over the last century, so which era are you really trying to emulate? Number 4, do look up tutorial videos on how to do a particular accent. But do not stop there. The very next thing you need to do is look up actual people with that actual accent talking. Number 5, if you're doing a foreign accent, listen to the original language. This will help you understand why they sound the way they do in that foreign accent. Number 6, there are things called accent tags where people are pronouncing an established set of words in the dialect or accent for you to pick up on the differences. Now, these are great for finding that one component of the accent, the first one, which is pronunciation. But this does nothing for the musicality since it's just individual words. That is the second component. Look up longer actual conversations or sentences to pick up on that musicality as well. Number 7, veer off script. Don't just read an established set of words. Talk to yourself, create a monologue, talk to your pets or your plants in that accent, read a book, recite song lyrics, something that's out of the blue, something you're not just going to recite into a microphone. This will help you truly internalize that accent. At first, it'll feel very stop and go, like, no, that doesn't sound right, how would somebody in that accent say it again? You'll get a lot of that, but if you improvise and just talk in general of whatever you can think of in that accent, you'll get much better and you'll be much more fluid later on. Number 8, try modifying your voice in that accent. So try different elements of the RCSB, changing them around with that accent. It's very easy to get locked into a stereotypical voice or one voice you happen to hear when you're trying to do an accent because of the resonance and all that stuff. For example, you'll see a lot of people who imitate the Irish accent tend to sound like leprechauns because that's what they were exposed to. But that's not the case. That's not really how people talk. If you try that accent and you try changing certain elements of the RCSB while maintaining that accent, that's when you can truly get like, oh, okay, that's what it should be. Number 9, find good and bad examples of that accent. I think there's something very valuable in finding what's wrong by yourself, saying, that person should have pronounced it this way or another. There's something that can really help you internalize that accent if you think about it that way. Number 10, try to talk to a person that actually has that accent, if you can. Have a conversation. No need to imitate, no need to talk about the accent itself. Just listen. Number 11, strive for subtlety. Learn the generalizations of that accent and then dial it back. A little really goes a long way. And finally, number 12, and this is something I've already talked about, always put character first. Just as a character shouldn't be defined just by where that character is from, neither should your voice. It's only a part of it. It certainly can be an important part, but it's not everything. Character and confidence always goes first. So that was accent. So sorry it was so long, but there was a lot to cover. It's a lot to absorb, but practice is key. Listen, analyze, and practice. Do these 3 things over and over and over again. Keep at it, and you'll be great at it in no time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope this helps you develop your character voices further. Please like and subscribe and check out What the World Podcast. It is an improvised comedy show done completely in character, and it's mainly there just as my personal practice, but anybody can listen to it. Perhaps they'll help in understanding how to apply these concepts to specific characters, and hopefully do them on your own. Thanks again, have a great time, be kind, and I'll see you soon.